I'm a 32-year-old guy, and up until this night, I thought my relationship with my in-laws was decent. Not perfect, but tolerable. My wife, Emma 29F, had a family that leaned a little too much into traditional values, but they'd always been polite to me. Her parents, Richard and Linda, were the kind of people who thought success meant a steady corporate job with a retirement plan. I, on the other hand, was a freelance graphic designer. Not exactly their dream for their daughter's husband, but they never said anything outright, just a lot of subtle comments over the years. When Emma told me about this celebration dinner, I didn't think much of it. She said it was going to be a special night with family, which wasn't unusual. She had just gotten a promotion, so I figured this was their way of marking the occasion. I even asked if I needed to bring anything, but she brushed it off, telling me it was all taken care of. That's when I noticed something was off. For the week leading up to the dinner, Emma was acting weird, distracted, hesitant when talking about it. Every time I mentioned it, she'd give these overly reassuring responses, like she was trying too hard to make me feel comfortable. "You're going to have a good time," she'd say, with this forced smile, like she was convincing herself more than me. Then there was Michael, Emma's younger brother. He and I got along pretty well, so when I ran into him a few days before the dinner, I casually mentioned it. His reaction, weird. He hesitated for a second, then said, "Oh yeah, that's gonna be an interesting night." Before I could ask what he meant, he immediately backtracked, saying, "I just mean, family stuff." That was the second red flag. The third came when a mutual friend sent me a vague text out of nowhere. "Hope the dinner goes okay. Just keep an open mind." That's when I knew something was up, but I had no idea what I was walking into. The night of the dinner, Emma and I arrived at her parents' house. Right away, I could tell something was off. The atmosphere was weirdly formal. Normally, these family dinners were casual. Jeans, sweaters, maybe a button-up if Richard felt fancy. But tonight, everyone was dressed up. Richard greeted me at the door with a tight smile and said, "We have a lot to talk about." No mention of celebrating Emma's promotion. No "glad you're here," just that. Inside, the table was already set, and I noticed the seating arrangement was unusual. Emma was sitting next to her mom and brother, while my seat was at the head of the table, separate from her. That was when my stomach started to twist. Still, I played along. The first few minutes were normal, small talk, passing around food, but then Richard stood up, raising his glass. "To the future," he said. The room fell uncomfortably silent. There was this pause, like everyone was waiting for something. Emma wouldn't look at me. Linda gave her a small nod, and Emma finally glanced in my direction, but she looked nervous. Richard cleared his throat and put his glass down. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating." He clasped his hands together, his tone shifting into something more serious. "It's about having an important discussion for the good of the family." That was when Linda reached under the table and pulled out a folder. I made a joke to lighten the tension. Something like, "Am I getting fired from the family?" Nobody laughed. Richard leaned forward. "We all care about you, and we know you're capable of great things, but we also think you could be making better choices for your future." I glanced at Emma. She still wasn't looking at me. Linda placed the folder in front of me and smiled. "We put this together because we believe in your potential." I opened it. Job listings, spreadsheets, career plans. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a celebration. It was an intervention. Richard started talking about financial stability and how he and Linda had been discussing my long-term prospects. He said they weren't trying to be critical, just realistic. Linda jumped in, saying they were worried about Emma's future and how my career didn't provide long-term security. I turned to Emma, expecting her to say something, anything, to back me up. Instead, she reached for my hand and squeezed it. "Just listen with an open heart." That was when I knew. She had been in on this the whole time. Richard kept talking, but I barely heard him. Words like opportunity and growth blended together as I stared at the folder in front of me. The job listings were pre-filled with my name. They had actually gone and researched career paths they thought I should take. I pushed the folder back. "I'm happy with my job." Richard frowned. "But is it sustainable?" Linda sighed. "Sweetheart, this isn't an attack. We just want you to think about your future. About Emma's future." That was the real reason for all of this. They didn't think I was good enough for their daughter. Emma stayed silent as her parents took turns laying out their concerns. They went on about how they had seen other family members make similar mistakes, how people who took their advice ended up happier, more secure. Then finally, Richard dropped the line that made my blood run cold. "We're not saying you have to change everything overnight," he said, "but if you don't take some steps toward a more stable career, things might get difficult." The way he said it, the weight behind those words made it clear this wasn't just a suggestion, it was a threat. Emma still hadn't said a word to defend me. That was when I realized this wasn't just about my career, this was about control, and I wasn't going to play along. Richard cleared his throat. "We've done some research on career options. Just some suggestions. Nothing too serious." Linda pushed a folder toward me, its contents suspiciously well organized. It was clear they had put far too much thought into this. Everything was color-coded, organized down to the last detail. Salary breakdowns, employment benefits, career trajectory projections. It looked like someone had spent weeks putting this together. "This is what we came up with," he said, sliding the folder closer to me. Linda leaned in, her voice warm but firm. We're only doing this because we care about you both. We want you to have a future you can depend on. Emma still hadn't said a word. She just sat there staring at the table. Richard pointed at one of the pages. This one's a management training program. Full benefits, company car after 2 years, and a pension plan. His finger moved down the list. Here's another, graphic design work, but in-house at a real firm. Stability, paid time off, a 401k. Michael, Emma's younger brother, leaned back in his chair. It's not like they're telling you to be a doctor or something. They just want what's best for you. He shrugged, like this was all perfectly normal. I looked at Emma, waiting for her to step in. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and took a deep breath. Just look at it. I pushed the folder away. Linda let out a long sigh. Sweetheart, Emma is the one supporting the household. That's a lot of pressure on her. She's been too nice to say it, but she needs you to step up. Emma's grip on her lap tightened. Richard tapped the folder again. These are just applications. No one's asking you to quit tomorrow. Just take a look, fill them out, see what's out there. I didn't move. Emma finally glanced up, her voice quieter than before. I love you, but this isn't just about you anymore. We can't keep living like this. We need stability. We need something solid before we think about having a family. Richard sat back, watching me closely. If you don't start thinking ahead, things might get more difficult for you too. The words were slow, deliberate, the meaning was obvious. I clenched my fists under the table. Linda leaned in, smiling like she was offering me a gift. You know you wouldn't be the first. Michael's friend took his father's advice, went into real estate, and now he's making 6 figures. Your cousin Mark, remember him? He was struggling too, but after listening to some wisdom, he's doing so much better now. I barely heard her. My focus was on Emma, still sitting there, still silent. She reached for my hand, whispering, please don't make this harder than it has to be. That's when I snapped. I shoved my chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. The entire room went still. I grabbed the folder, lifted it up, and let it drop back onto the table with a dull thud. This is what you really think of me. No one spoke. I shook my head, looking straight at Emma. And you knew this was coming? She swallowed hard, but she didn't deny it. I looked at her parents. I'm not signing anything. Richard exhaled sharply, sitting back in his chair. We hoped you'd be reasonable. I turned and walked out. I didn't check to see if Emma followed. She didn't. I drove aimlessly for a while, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My phone sat on the passenger seat, silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. I finally picked it up and sent a single text to Emma. Are you coming home? No response. The messages started rolling in soon after. Michael sent something vague. Hey man, just think about it. A notification popped up from a family group chat I didn't even know I was in. Linda had messaged, he just needs time to process everything. He'll come around. Like this was just a tantrum, and not a complete betrayal. I stared at my screen, waiting. Still nothing from Emma. An hour passed before my phone finally rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was shaking. She was crying. She didn't know it would go like that. It wasn't what she expected. She didn't think it would be so much. I asked her outright, do you actually agree with them? Silence. Then a quiet. I just think they have a point. I pulled the car over. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't saying they were wrong. She wasn't saying she stood by me. She was defending them. I asked her again, clearer this time. So, if I don't change my career, what happens? Do you even respect me? She sniffled, hesitated, then changed the subject. She wasn't answering. Instead, she offered a compromise. She wasn't saying I had to get a new job. Just apply. Just one of the jobs in the folder. Just to show her parents that I was trying. That was it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about me. It was about control. I told her flat out, I wasn't doing this. I wasn't playing along with this manipulation. She cried harder but didn't fight back. I hung up. The next morning my phone buzzed again. An email. From Richard. Subject, no hard feelings. I opened it. We understand that emotions ran high last night. When you're ready to take responsibility, we'll help. Family looks out for each other. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Take responsibility. For what? For not letting them run my life. I didn't reply. Later that day, I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through our shared finances. I had trusted Emma to handle most of the bills. After all, we both agreed it made sense at the time. But as I looked closer, I saw how much control she had taken, little by little, until my name was barely anywhere. Her name was on everything. The mortgage, the utilities, the credit cards. Mine, barely anywhere. She wasn't just the primary breadwinner. She was the one in charge. It was all making sense now. This wasn't just about my career. She had been waiting for me to change. She never actually accepted me. Emma came home that evening. I watched as she walked through the door, dropped her purse, and acted like nothing happened. She kissed my cheek, asked if I had eaten, and started making small talk about her day. Like the last 24 hours hadn't happened. She didn't mention the dinner. She didn't mention the folder. She just kept acting like we could pretend it didn't happen. I didn't play along. I asked her if she had been talking to her parents. She paused. Then, in the most casual voice, she said, yeah, of course. They just want to make sure you're okay. I stared at her. She wasn't going to let this go. She sat down across from me, reaching for my hand again. Can't you just talk to them again? I pulled my hand back. No, she sighed, got up and went to shower. Over the next week, a cold war settled into the house. Emma barely spoke to me unless it was about chores, bills, or something meaningless. Every time she picked up her phone, I could tell she was texting them. They were still in her ear. She wasn't questioning anything. She wasn't rethinking anything. She was waiting for me to break. I wasn't going to. One night, I got up to get some water. As I walked past the bedroom, I heard her on the phone. She was whispering, "I just need more time to convince him." I stopped in my tracks. Convince me, not support me. Not work through this together. Convince me. She was never on my side. She was just waiting to wear me down. I stood there for a long moment listening to her keep talking, keep planning, keep scheming. Then I turned around, walked back to the couch and lay down. This marriage was already over. I stood outside the bedroom door for a moment, letting Emma's words sink in. I just need more time to convince him. Not talk to me. Not work through it. Convince me. I pushed the door open. The floor creaked, and Emma spun around, phone still in her hand. I didn't waste time. Convince me of what exactly? Her face went pale. She fumbled to end the call, setting her phone down like she could pretend I hadn't just heard everything. I was just talking things through with my mom. I stepped inside. So what's the plan? Keep pushing until I give in. Wait me out. Make me feel like I'm crazy, until I do what your parents want. She shook her head quickly. No, it's not like that. But her voice cracked at the end. I pointed to the phone. Then why are you sneaking around on calls, talking about convincing me instead of just talking to me? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I was trying to figure out how to make you understand. I let out a sharp breath. So manipulation. Emma's expression shifted. Embarrassment, frustration, then something colder. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I raised an eyebrow. Your parents set up an intervention, tried to control my career. You sat there and let them. And now, instead of realizing how messed up that is, you're plotting how to wear me down. She groaned and rubbed her temples. Why are you acting like I'm the villain here? They just want what's best for us. I leaned against the doorframe. And what about what I want? She crossed her arms. You're making this so much harder than it has to be. That was it. The final crack. I looked her straight in the eye. If I never change careers, will you ever stop trying to fix me? The silence stretched. She didn't answer. Her hesitation said everything. After a long pause, she exhaled sharply. I just thought, over time, you'd grow out of it. My stomach twisted. Grow out of it. Like my job was some phase. Like my career. Something I built. Something I loved. Was just a childish hobby she assumed I'd get over. She must have realized how bad that sounded, because she quickly tried to backtrack. I still love you. This doesn't change that. I shook my head. It was never about love. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She knew I was right. I turned to leave. I wasn't going to keep arguing with someone who had already made up her mind about who I was supposed to be. Emma didn't stop me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. Emma told us everything. We're so disappointed in how you handled this. I didn't even bother responding. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I pulled out a chair. You need to set some boundaries with them. She sighed but didn't look up. They just care about us. I clenched my jaw. That's not caring. That's control. She didn't answer. The silent treatment started after that. Emma barely spoke to me unless it was about something mundane. The grocery list, bills, whether I'd taken out the trash. Everything else, she ignored. But she kept texting her parents. Constantly. At night she'd go into the other room for long phone calls. The door would close, and I'd hear the muffled voice of Linda or Richard. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. I barely recognized the person I was living with. A few days later I ran into Michael at a coffee shop. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. I waited. Finally he sighed. They're pushing her to rethink things. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. My parents, they think she should step back from the marriage. Until you get your priorities straight. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. And she's listening? Michael didn't answer. That told me enough. I got home late that night. Emma was already in bed, her phone screen glowing in the dim room. She didn't look up as I walked past. The air was thick with something unspoken, but I already knew something big was coming. Either a breaking point or a final fight. The cold war between us dragged on for days. No arguments, no screaming, just silence. Every time I walked into a room, Emma was either glued to her phone or pretending to be busy. Then one night, I heard her get out of bed. The floor creaked as she moved toward the living room. I followed. She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring outside like she was waiting for something. Without turning around, she finally spoke. She had been thinking about our future, about what she wanted. I waited. Then she dropped it. She wasn't sure if this marriage was working anymore. She thought taking a break might be the best thing for both of us. The words hung in the air. I didn't react at first. Just let them settle. Then I asked, "Are you saying you want a separation?" She hesitated. then nodded. I let out a sharp laugh, bitter, humorless. So your family got what they wanted. She flinched. But she didn't deny it. She started saying it wasn't about them, that this was her decision, that she needed space to figure things out. I didn't believe her, because if it was truly her choice, she wouldn't have needed weeks of their voices in her ear, pushing her, pressuring her, guiding her to this exact moment. I didn't argue, didn't fight, I just looked at her and said, okay, that was it. The next morning I woke up to a notification from Richard. Glad you and Emma are taking space. Let's talk soon. I saw red. I got up, walked straight to the kitchen, and put my phone down on the counter in front of Emma. She read the message. Then instead of looking shocked or angry, she just sighed. He just wants to help. I scoffed. He's not helping. He's engineering this. He's been steering you toward this since the dinner. Emma rubbed her forehead. They just want me to have stability. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. And what if that stability means not being with me? She looked away. That was my answer. I pushed away from the counter. If you go through with this, you're proving your parents own you. Her expression hardened. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then finally I said, if you walk away, I won't be waiting for you to come back. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't respond. That night, we went through the motions of living under the same roof. We ate in silence, moved around each other like ghosts. At one point, she whispered that she still loved me. I didn't react, because love without respect meant nothing. I slept on the couch. I wasn't about to beg someone to stay. The next morning, she packed a bag. She didn't make a scene. No long speeches. No drawn-out goodbyes. She stood by the door, hesitating for a second, like she expected me to stop her. I didn't. She left. And just like that, the marriage was over. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. A few days after Emma left, Michael texted me. They're celebrating. My parents. They think Emma is finally taking time for herself. I stared at the message for a while before setting my phone down. It wasn't surprising. This was what Richard and Linda wanted all along. They hadn't just pushed Emma to leave. They were proud of it. They thought they won. But I wasn't about to sit around waiting for Emma to figure things out. I filed for divorce first. The papers were served a week later. Days passed before Emma finally called. At first she was defensive, saying she just needed time to think. But as the weeks dragged on, the messages changed. First anger, then confusion, then eventually regret. She wasn't expecting me to move on before she did. She thought we'd take a break, that we'd work through things at her pace, that I'd sit in limbo while she decided whether I was good enough to stay married to. I didn't play along. Later that day, Richard texted me. Mature decision. We knew you'd do the right thing. I blocked his number. Emma's messages changed after that. The anger turned into desperation. She sent long emotional texts. She hadn't wanted a divorce, just space, just time. She had been confused. I didn't buy it. She wasn't confused when she let her parents ambush me. She wasn't confused when she packed her bags. She wasn't confused when she walked out the door. She just hadn't expected me to move on first. Then Linda called. She started slow, acting calm, controlled. But the moment I refused to budge, her tone shifted. She accused me of not fighting for Emma, of giving up on my marriage too easily, of being selfish. I laughed and hung up. Emma refused to sign the papers at first. She needed time. She wasn't ready. I looped in my lawyer. He told me to prepare for a long process. It didn't matter. I wasn't backing down. A month passed. Then Emma started backtracking. She texted me asking if we could talk. Not about paperwork. Not about logistics. She wanted to clear the air. I shut it down immediately. There was nothing left to talk about. Michael reached out again. I don't agree with them. I just can't say that out loud. I appreciated the honesty. At least someone in that family had some self-awareness. A few days later, Emma showed up at my place. She stood at the door, eyes red, holding her arms like she wasn't sure what to do with them. She started talking about mistakes, about second chances. I stayed firm. This wasn't salvageable. We were beyond repair. She tried to argue, but deep down she knew. I closed the door. 2 weeks later, she finally signed the papers. With them came a long handwritten letter, a dramatic letter. She blamed me for giving up too fast, for not waiting, for not trusting that she would have come back. I didn't even finish reading it. I tossed it in a drawer and never looked at it again. After the divorce was finalized, I moved into a new place. A fresh start. No reminders of Emma. No ties to her family. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Then the social media posts started. Vague, sad quotes about losing what you didn't appreciate, about mistakes you can't undo, about love that was thrown away too soon. I ignored it. Richard made one last attempt, one final text. You'll regret this someday. I never replied. I knew the truth. I didn't lose anything. I escaped. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, word started spreading. Emma moved back in with her parents, but they quickly grew impatient. The same pressure they had put on me started shifting onto her, suggesting new jobs, pushing her to get out and start fresh. Soon she wasn't just their daughter anymore. She was another problem to fix. Apparently, she had expected me to chase after her. She thought I'd fight for her, apologize, I didn't. At first Richard and Linda were thrilled. Their daughter was finally free. They made a big show of it, telling family and friends how Emma had made the right choice. But after a few weeks, the excitement faded. Emma wasn't moving forward. She wasn't thriving like they expected. She was just stuck. Linda started complaining to people that Emma was lost, that she wasn't moving on. The irony was hilarious. Then the text started. Random messages from Emma that weren't about the divorce, but were clearly about the divorce. I thought I'd feel better by now, but I don't. I miss how simple things used to be. It's weird not talking every day. I ignored every single one. A week later, an email from Richard landed in my inbox. If you're willing to be reasonable, we could talk about getting things back on track. I laughed, deleted it. Emma's reputation took a hit. At first our mutual friends had stayed neutral, but as time passed, they started seeing through her behavior. She had been the one who wanted space. She had left. Yet now she was acting like the victim. Michael texted me again, "You were right about everything." I just replied, "I know." Then came the failed dating attempts. Emma tried going out again. It didn't go well. She kept comparing her dates to me. Kept telling people she had the perfect relationship but lost it. She wasn't over it. Not even close. The Facebook posts started next. Vague, sad messages. Some people don't know how to fight for love. I wish I had seen the truth sooner. I scrolled past them without a second thought. Then a friend sent me a screenshot. Emma had posted in a private group chat. "I don't get why he didn't wait for me." I laughed. She really thought I'd sit around hoping she'd come back. A few nights later, her name popped up on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call. Then another, finally a voicemail notification. I didn't listen to it, just deleted it. Then came the meltdown. A long, angry text, blaming me for not fighting harder, for giving up, for never really loving her. That was it. I blocked her number. Michael reached out one last time. My parents finally gave up. They stopped pushing her to date. Now they're just mad she won't move out. I smirked at the message. Richard and Linda had orchestrated everything, and now they were stuck with the consequences. For the first time in years, my life was completely free of them. No drama, no manipulation, just peace. A full year had passed since that disaster of a celebration dinner. Looking back, it felt like another lifetime. My career, thriving. I was making more money than I ever did while married. Landed some high-profile clients, and had full control over my life. No more fights about stability. No more pressure to change. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. I had also started dating again. Rachel 31F was the exact opposite of Emma in all the best ways. She respected my career, believed in me, and actually celebrated my successes instead of seeing them as problems to fix. Being with her felt easy. No constant battles, no silent treatments, no parents lurking in the background, pulling strings. The difference was night and day. Meanwhile, Emma, still stuck. Michael reached out now and then with updates. Not that I asked for them, but some were too funny to ignore. Richard and Linda had a new problem now. With me out of the picture, they had no one else to control. But Emma, they were pushing her to get serious. Find a better job. Move out. Apparently, their golden child wasn't golden anymore. She still hadn't moved out. Still wasn't in a solid relationship. Still posting vague, bitter messages about past mistakes and lessons learned the hard way. She had expected to move forward while I spiraled. Instead, it was the other way around. Then, one day, Michael told me something that almost made me choke on my drink. At a family gathering, Richard was overheard grumbling about how Emma hadn't moved forward like he expected. She had everything set up for her, and she still failed to take the next step. It was clear he was frustrated, not because he regretted losing me, but because Emma wasn't meeting his expectations either. I nearly died laughing. The same man who tried everything to push me out of his daughter's life now regretted it. Then Emma did something unexpected. Out of nowhere, she sent me a friend request on Facebook. I didn't even hesitate. Declined. A day later, she tried again. Then messaged Rachel. Rachel showed me the DM. "Hope you know what you're getting into." Rachel smirked, typed a quick response, and hit send. "I do. He's amazing." Then she blocked Emma. That was the last time she tried to contact either of us. Michael texted me after that. "Dude, my parents are finally realizing they festerous cooked up." I just replied, "Took them long enough." Emma had rebranded herself now, a self-improvement guru. She started a blog about growth and healing and becoming the best version of yourself. It flopped. She barely posted, and when she did, it was the same passive-aggressive nonsense she had been throwing around all year. At some point, my parents finally gave their opinion on everything. They had always stayed out of the drama, never really taking sides. But during a casual dinner, my mom finally admitted, "We always had a bad feeling about Emma's family." I wasn't even surprised. Sometimes, parents just know. Then came the weirdest part. One of Rachel's friends stumbled across an old Pinterest board, Emma's wedding planning board. Some of the pins were recent, suggesting she hadn't fully let go. Whether she was holding on to memories or struggling with regret, I didn't know, and I didn't care. I just shook my head and moved on. Rachel and I had already started talking about our future, moving in together, building something real, something based on respect. Unlike Emma, she wasn't trying to change me, she just wanted me. Then, the final update from Michael. Richard and Linda's patience started wearing thin. At first, they framed it as giving her space, but as weeks turned into months, their tone shifted. The same pressure they put on me started creeping into their conversations with her. They hadn't given up on control. They had just refocused it. And I had won. Not in a petty way. Not in an I got the last laugh way. But in the only way that mattered. I escaped them. I built a better life. And Emma was still stuck. Walking away was the best thing I ever did. I dodged a lifetime of manipulation, and for the first time in years I was finally free. Out of nowhere, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: I finally understand. Emma. For a moment, I considered deleting it without opening it, but curiosity got the best of me. I clicked. It was a mess. A long, rambling apology about how she had been too influenced by her parents. How she wished she had listened to her heart instead of letting them control her. How she had lost something real and only now realized what she had done. The whole thing was vague. No real accountability. No specifics about the damage she caused. Then, toward the end, the real reason behind the email slipped through. She was struggling. Not outright begging to come back, but heavily hinting that we should talk things through and reconnect. I sat back in my chair. Michael's last message suddenly made sense. A few days earlier, he had texted me. Emma's moving out. Parents finally kicked her out. They were done supporting her. And now she was suddenly sorry. I closed the email. I didn't reply. I never would. Michael sent another update later that day. Richard and Linda didn't admit fault outright. At first, they dismissed Emma's struggles, insisting she just needed time. But as months passed, their confidence faltered. They had steered her toward this path. Now, they weren't sure they had chosen the right one. And now, their daughter was struggling, and they couldn't fix it. That same night, Rachel surprised me with a weekend getaway, a celebration for one of my biggest work successes yet. I didn't even hesitate. We packed our bags and left. While I was out enjoying life, Emma was posting another cryptic Facebook rant, something about rebuilding after betrayal. But this time, no one engaged. No pity comments. No validation. People were tired of it. Michael sent one last text. I think my parents finally get it. You won. I just replied. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live. After months of desperate attempts to get my attention, Emma finally went completely silent. No more messages. No more vague posts. Just nothing. She had finally given up. Richard and Linda weren't as lucky. Some of their extended family had cut ties with them after seeing how they had treated me. They had built their entire identity around controlling Emma's life. Now, they had nothing to show for it. Meanwhile, Rachel and I had officially moved in together. For the first time in years, I was in a relationship where I felt respected, where I didn't have to prove my worth to someone's family, where I was just happy. At some point I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about Emma at all in weeks. She used to be a constant weight in my life. Now, she was just a chapter I had left behind. Walking away wasn't just the right choice. It was the only choice. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The end.